Every public body shall give notice of the date, time, and location of its meetings other than special, emergency, or continued meetings at least 3 working days in advance by posting such notice on its official public government website, if any, placing such notice in a prominent public location at which notices are regularly posted, and placing such notice at the office of the clerk of the board body, or in the case of a public body that has no clerk, the office of the chief administrator. Reasonable notice under these circumstances of special, emergency, or continued meetings shall be given contemporaneously with notice provided to the members of the policy body conducting the meeting. Mrs. Tanner, has today's school board meeting been properly certified?
Yes, Madam Chair, on December 27, 2019, notice was provided fulfilling all criteria of VA Code Chapter 37.
Thank you, Ms. Tanner. I duly call this meeting to order. Ms. Tanner, please proceed with the roll call.
Basine?
Here.
Campson? Here. Clanton?
Present.
Smith? Martin?
She is running a few minutes late.
Okay. And Jordan?
I believe he's going to be arriving late as well. Okay, very good. Well, welcome, everybody. It's our February work session. The year is rolling right along. We're happy to have all of our guests with us today, administrators, and anyone, of course, tuning in today. We're going to go ahead and get started with our main topic, student learning and achievement, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Birdsong.
Good afternoon, Dr. Gabriel, Mr. Clanton, members of the board, our community. Today, we will be providing you an update related to our STAR reading and math data. You received a couple of months ago a review of our fall assessment data, and today we will be presenting our winter data to you. And we will be talking about the universal screener, what that means, and any other pertinent information related to that. This afternoon we have Gwen with us and Rhonda White from our mathematics department, and so they will be sharing the information with you. And we have 2 of our illustrious principals here today, so I will be bringing them up later. So Ms. Collins will start off with just giving some or Ms. White to provide the update about what is a universal screener and why the board may be looking at this level of data.
Okay. And if I might, I did just recall, I did receive an email from Ms. Smith about a training that she had for today, so she will also be arriving a little bit late. So I just remember that.
All right.
Sorry. Proceed.
It's not,
That
It's
is
on?
our,
it's on. I did
Yeah, I
check.
see them.
that is the NPS
It's
curse, the curse of the cursor.
the curse of the cursor.
Just want to click to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, so we are gonna, we're sharing STAR reading and math data with you all, and this is our universal screener. So we thought it'd be a good idea to let you know what a universal screener is and how we use it to monitor student achievement. So it's really a first step at the beginning of the school year in us determining what students are at risk for reading and math difficulties, what students that we need to pinpoint immediately as soon as school starts. So it's given in September. It's a brief assessment, so it's not something that is given over several days. It's given it takes about 35 minutes to take, so it's pretty brief. We give STAR to all of our 2nd through 8th grade students, and we do have STAR early literacy for some of our kindergarten and 1st grade students in a few schools. So it's given to every 2nd through 8th grader 3 times a year, and we give it in the fall, the winter, and the spring, and then we also use it during the year usually about 4 to 6 weeks to progress monitor student achievement. And not only the student achievement, but we also use it to look at the intervention that we're using with those students. So if it's small group instruction with an interventionist, we want to track that as well so we can start to determine what's working and what's not working and where we may need to regroup from that point. So that's how we use it as a screener.
And as we are sharing data today, you will notice the grade equivalent score that we will be sharing. This is a norm reference score. And when we're looking at this, this is an estimate of that student's performance against students that are in that same grade nationally. We have an example here for you, and you'll see that it's an example of a 5th grade student that may have a GE of 7.6. So this student has scored typically with students who are in the 7th grade, the 6th month of school. That does not mean that if we were to place this 5th grade student in a 7th grade classroom that they would be proficient with all of the 7th grade content. It just means that that student is performing definitely above 5th grade level.
Okay, so we're going to look at our proficiency results, and we're going to start with reading. And so on the slide, you all have, and I'm going to kind of just go over generally how this table is laid out. So we have 2nd through 8th grade. English, we give, when you think about middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, they all take English. There's 6th grade English, 7th grade English, 8th grade English. Ms. White will talk about how in math it's a little bit different when we get to math classes in middle school. So these are all of our 2nd through 8th graders. And if you look across the top where we have grade 2, the expected benchmark is there. So that's that grade equivalent score, so 1.9 to 2.2. And the way to think about that is that 1.9 is thinking 1st grade, 9th month. So that's the end of 1st grade. And then 2.2 would be 2nd grade, 2nd month of school. And so that's really how you look at that number. And you can see that our 2nd graders came in at 1.9, so at the end of 1st grade, and that's the expected. They're within that range. And then it's banded into, that's the fall data, and then you can see the next column is that's our percent of students on or above grade level. And I always think of this number as 58% of our students are reading proficiently. They are reading at the place where they should be reading for this time in the fall. So if you move over to winter, you can see that the band moves. So we expect, STAR starts to increase and have higher expectations as the year goes on because we want reading proficiency to improve, and we want students to move now more towards the middle of the 2nd grade year. And so our grade equivalent average for all of our 2nd graders is a 2.4, so that's really thinking 2nd grade, 4th month. And then the percent of students on grade level this time of year, so in the winter of 2020, is 70%. And then the next column over is what that proficiency change is, so that either the growth or the change from the percent of students on grade level in the fall, and then the percent that were on or above in the winter. And so as you can see, in elementary school, in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade, we had growth. We had, and our greatest growth was in 2nd grade. A little caveat about 2nd grade, this is the first time they've ever taken a test that is timed like this. And so they're coming, you look at them as coming in as 1st graders, and they're on a computer taking this timed test. And so there is some things you have to work through there. So they've gotten used to it by the time we get to the winter screening. We've done a lot of work in elementary school with small group instruction, and I think that is impacting that growth that we're seeing with our students. That growth, then when you look at 5th grade through 8th grade, that growth is not there. It's pretty much stagnant. It looks like the students are about the same as they were at the beginning of the year to fall and winter. However, their reading has increased. So when I look at that flat, 0%, 63% of our 5th graders are on grade level at the beginning of the year, and now at this time, 63% are on grade level now. I don't look at that as a negative because the test has gotten harder, so we haven't lost students. That's where I start to get concerned. In 6th and 7th grade, we are seeing that dip back a little bit. Once we hit 5th grade, the test is more complex. The reading that they're doing is much more complex. They're having to read longer pieces of text, but it's still in that same amount of time. So the expectation is that the students can read that amount of text in that same short period of time, because that would be the expectation, that as you become older, you're able to read longer text. So we know from this data, I know that middle school is an area of concern for the English department, and this impacts how we are moving forward with what our next steps are. Rhonda, if you could. And so what kinds of things are we doing differently in the English office? The first thing is we've looked at this strand data from STAR, and we feel that summarizing is an area that we could grow in. And so what we have done is focused on using text annotation, which is one of our non-negotiables that we're expecting all of our teachers in English to do, and we've broken text annotation down into simple steps for teachers so that they can understand exactly what that means, and then how you take that text annotation and turn it into a summarization. And when I'm talking about text annotation, I'm talking about reading with a pencil in hand, and you're interacting with the text. You're underlining important things. You might circle places where you're confused about something, and then on the side, you're making sketch notes, you might write questions, you're labeling things, you're putting things over there that you know are important. You can then use that visual and all those notes that you've put onto the text with the text as a way to summarize what you've read about. And so 2 weeks ago, on our January Professional Development Day, something that we've never done before is we trained kindergarten through 12th grade-specific text annotation for every teacher. And so we did that with all of our secondary English teachers. We provided them resources, what that should look like. When I walk into a classroom, I'm expecting to see students interacting with text. Well, what should that look like? That should look like them doing the underlining, sketchnoting on the side, coming up with a way that they're sketchnoting. They are interacting and reading text. We've given them resources to do that with, along with sample lesson plans at every grade level, so that they know what that should look like in their plan, and then they can use that plan to model their plan after. And then our next layer of support and kind of how we're thinking about things differently, you might look at this and say, data analysis support, don't you do that all the time? We do that all the time, but one of the things that we've really honed in on is making sure that we have a protocol for data analysis, and that our schools know how to look at the data, group their students, align all of their resources that they have, from part-time tutors to interventionists to any computer software that they have that they could use with students, determine what those interventions are, and then how are they going to monitor that and make sure that that monitoring process is in place. Because a lot of times we do the data analysis, but the most important part is making sure that we're looking at that alignment of resources, determining what the interventions are, and then making sure we're monitoring those interventions at the same time. And then our last piece from the English office is, how can we support administrators and literacy leaders in the schools? What things can we do to make sure all these non-negotiables and these things that we want to take place in our classrooms are happening? And the way that we do that is by facilitating walkthroughs with those leaders and talking to them about what we're seeing in the classroom. Are we seeing text annotation? What would that look like? It's a great conversation when I'm side by side with a principal or a reading specialist and having a conversation of that, see what is happening right there with that student. That's what the expectation is that a student would do. And if that's not happening, what can we do to support the teachers? It could be coaching from our end, where myself or my teacher specialists come in and model for teachers or provide more PD on what the expectation is. And then we've also, and Rhonda and I just did this a week ago, where we facilitated an on-site data analysis, and we went into a school and we took their entire third grade and analyzed their STAR data. We grouped all of their students. We aligned all of their resources. We helped them come up with a plan for implementation of those interventions, and then what support that we could offer. And then at the same time, how are we going to monitor that? And I'll be back at that school tomorrow to have that discussion with them. I think you were there today. To have that same discussion with them to make sure that our Tier 3 schools are making that growth and, making that student achievement is happening in those schools.
Mrs. White?
Are we waiting until the end, or can we ask? Okay.
We're gonna let her get through the math part.
Don't want to do it by subject area and then relate. Would that be all right?
Okay, so what we'll do is, each subject then we'll take it in segments, and then we'll take questions. So now that we've done the reading segment, we'll go ahead and take some questions, and then we'll move on to the math segment. So, Ms. Martin, you had a question?
Yeah, I'm not an educator, I'm a policy person, but I'm just trying to digest this a little bit, because when I was looking at it earlier and I saw grades going back to the STAR reading by grade, I was kind of, I don't know, looked at it and was like, oh, why aren't we doing better from the fall to the winter? And I understand you said that the explanation was that the text gets harder and the passages get longer. But this is confusing for me and probably most people, because if you know it's going to be more complex and you know that it's going to be longer, why aren't the children prepared to take that test and make improvements? I mean, that's what it looks like when I look at this data. That's what I'm getting, that they weren't prepared for the
Right,
test.
so, and you're exactly right. So they're probably not prepared to read these longer texts because the students are coming in at a lower grade level. So when you're looking at 5th, 6th, and 7th grade, you can see that our students are 1 to 2 years below grade level. And so we're working right now to make sure that our students are prepared to read longer and more complex texts. We've weaved Read 14.2 in, where they're reading more frequently on a daily basis for 15 minutes, sustained reading, where and I've talked about this before, you don't get better at something you don't do. And so we have to make sure that our students have opportunities to read daily. And that, that's part of our whole monitoring piece, is trying to make sure that that's happening on a daily basis. And I completely agree with you that our students should be more prepared to take the STAR test, and I would want to see more growth with that. And I think that our monitoring piece that we're layering in will hopefully help with that student achievement.
Isn't STAR a program we pay for? Am I accurate on that? We pay for this program
It's a test, though.
to predict how well students will do as they progress. But if they're not ready for this subject matter and we're testing them, it just seems like, I'm just really confused by the process.
Well, let me
as
talk
well.
a little more then about what STAR is. STAR is a computer adaptive test. And so what that does is when I go to take the test, it is going to start to move within how I answer and the passages that I'm reading. So it's able to start to say, I need to move up, I need to go backwards, I need to, I might need to go back even further to some fluency and phonics things that go backwards. So it really, to me, what STAR does is gives teachers a look into where a student is reading, and from that piece, I'm able to determine what holes I need to fill for that student. So for example, if I have 5th graders that are reading on a 2nd grade level, I know that I'm going to be working on phonics and fluency with those 5th graders to increase their reading proficiency. And so that's what STAR does for us. It's very different from the DBA, because the DBA sticks right here at 5th grade level. It's not going to move at all.
I've taken adapted tests before. I know what they are. But again, they're going to take this again in the spring, and if they're catching up to what they're tested on in the winter, then how are they going to be able to achieve in the spring? Am I seeing this in a weird way? I'm just not understanding.
So the purpose of
Why are we
this
doing this?
to
mean,
plan and implement interventions. That's the whole point of doing it. So we can see where the children are and to plan instruction for each individual child.
When do you catch them up?
You catch them every day.
the time.
Every day. Every day you have to catch them up.
Because we have negative numbers on here.
Yeah, and so we too are concerned about that. But this is to inform instruction. And if the teachers did not have this data, they would know what to do. So they had the data for each child, so they're able to individualize that instruction for each child. And I think when the building principals present their information, you're going to see how the gaps are closed.
And remind me again, do the parents get this information, or is this just for the teachers?
Well, I'm sure it's, yes.
get it.
I don't know how they disseminate it. I don't know if it's
Okay.
electronically, and they can share all of that with you.
Okay, thanks.
I know that with my children, they do know what their star number is, and they are working towards building upon it. That's one of their personal goals that they have, so.
Right, and thank you for bringing that up, because that is something that schools do, is they have, students take ownership of where they are with STAR and set goals for themselves, and you can do that right within the program as well.
Ms. Basine?
I have some higher level questions. So there are a couple things that I'd like to know. So are we also looking at this in terms of how many students were in pre-K? Because we know that these gaps start early on. So how many students were in pre-K? Were they in our pre-K versus, outside MPS pre-K? And then how to really target and know which children may need greater intervention or greater access and exposure. So that's one thing I'd like to know, and I know you may not know that right now, unless you do.
That's something that we can look into. I know ARA has looked into kind of tracking students that are in pre-K, in our pre-K, and then what happens, how do they progress throughout their years in Norfolk Public Schools. Is that what you're kind of thinking?
Yes, and working backwards, how do we advocate or collaborate with like Head Start and other pre-K programs to ensure that, that we're seeing the developmentally appropriate progress that they should be making. The second piece is, because this is a time test, how our students with disabilities are doing in relation, this is the big picture, but how are they doing? Are there accommodations being provided for those students in this setting? I know they have to be, but how are we, monitoring that? And
That would be the special
Yeah,
education.
it's
would
the building
monitor.
teacher, or the building level teacher who is responsible for the implementation of that IEP. So whatever is noted in that child's IEP, they are required to provide those
Right.
specific accommodations.
right, okay.
Yeah.
Because I would like to know, like by subgroups, what this looks like. Like,
And that was provided.
okay,
Yeah.
it was.
Okay.
All right, I didn't see it.
All right.
Provided.
And the third thing is time, and this kind of piggybacks on what I think I heard Mrs. Martin say, is that, we've heard this, I think, I know for many years now, but if our kids are constantly being assessed and the time isn't there for teaching and learning, how do we get to a point where we're really moving kids along? And so I know we've over time have looked at the number of assessments that our students are taking. Is this the only test that gets at this information? Is there, have you had discussions about how we might reduce it to give students more instruction time versus assessment time?
Well, I think we have had those conversations. I know from the English standpoint, when we look at our K-2 literacy assessments, we've tried to pace those out so that we're not using instructional time to put those layers in, to add another assessment. And so we've really tried to say, okay, we are giving STAR reading at this time of the year so that One, it is a time test, so it's 35 minutes. And it does not take away from the instructional time. So I think I am very cognizant of that and making sure that we're not using valuable instructional time to take yet another assessment.
Okay. Any other questions on this subject?
The only thing that I have in here is just when I look at going back to the 6th through 8th grade and looking at how low in percentage, I guess with the literacy rates here, is there a potential? I know we're going to talk about budget at some point and coming along. Are there going to be recommendations, particularly like targeting? Because I know you're looking for those interventions, and is this one of those areas that we really need
Definitely.
support?
Our
Def-
middle schools are not as staffed,
Struct-
as
right.
structured. The staffing is
staffed.
different, so they don't have the Title I teachers that the elementary schools have. They're usually the ones that deliver the interventions in addition to the classroom teacher. So when we're talking with middle school teachers and we're talking about interventions, we're having to have the conversation, and how do you plan to fit that into your math block, or how do you plan to deliver those interventions? Whereas in elementary schools, we're able to talk with a separate person, so we have
More
usually,
support.
yeah, more support there.
And the other piece, the other layer of that we do have reading specialist positions in the middle school right now in 4 of our middle schools, but we only have 1 of those filled. And so we're having a difficult time finding reading specialists to work in the middle school, which to me is a reason why we need a Grow Your Own reading specialist program, so we can grow our own teachers to become reading specialists in our buildings.
And the same would be for math specialists as well. We only have 1 math specialist in middle school. So at this point, we definitely would enjoy the opportunity to have a Grow Your Own program and then actually have the positions available for middle schools.
Great feedback.
But we both were Grow Your Own program people in Norfolk, we did. So it
Hearing
keeps us
grow,
here.
Grow your own thing here.
Even the
Couple over there,
principals.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, there
Principals,
we Hey, Norfolk Public Schools grew me up too. All right. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Ms. White.
Similar to reading, you will notice that as the year progresses, the benchmarks do increase. You will notice that 2nd grade had, if you're looking at going from the fall to the winter, they had a 16% when we're looking at that increase. Again, we want to note that as the 2nd graders come in, that's their first assessment. This is actually their first time reading it to themselves as well. And if we remember about math tests, a lot of math in this day and age is reading. So as they're having to solve those problems, they are reading on their own at this point. As you're looking at 3rd grade, 4th grade, and 6th grade, you'll notice that for the winter, the average is closer to the higher end. However, we're not quite there yet. Looking at 5th grade, we are above the expected benchmark range. And again, as we're looking in middle school, we'll notice that there are some differences, and you see that peak in 8th grade. But let's remember that the enrollment is different for our middle school courses. When we're looking at 6th grade, you're looking at those students that are either in 6th grade, that are in 6th grade math. However, the students that have qualified for the advanced track and they are taking the pre-algebra 8 course, they do not take the 6th grade math. They're taking the 8th grade assessment here. Because at the end of the school year, they would be taking the 8th grade, SOL test. So if their teacher opts to utilize the STAR math, it would be the STAR math for 8th grade. The same thing would occur for 7th grade. You may have students that are in pre-algebra 6, 7, and so they may be taking the pre-algebra 8th grade version for STAR, which is the 8th grade STAR, or you might have some of those students not taking a STAR assessment because they are enrolled in algebra. And the same thing holds true for 8th grade. Some of those students could be taking algebra or geometry, so they would not be taking the Math 8. So it's not just as straightforward, these are all of our 6th graders, these are all of our 7th graders, these are all of our 8th graders.
Yeah.
From looking at our, it went the wrong way.
Not moving. It's-
From looking at our, oh, it went the wrong way. From looking at our, from looking at our, oh, it went the wrong way. From looking at our, 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 from looking
Okay, can we just advance it?
just-
Let's
yeah.
just advance it manually. Okay. Okay. Do you need us to move to the next slide, or you're good?
I can keep going, but
Yes.
if you see it.
On the wrong slide.
All right. Well, from looking at our overall district data, and we do this by school, and we definitely get a better picture for helping individual schools. But if we're looking at this district-wide, when we are looking at individual skills, we definitely see if we've covered it in pacing, the students do better. STAR is a cumulative test. And if they're looking at our pacing guide, we can, of course, look at the skills that we've already covered. However, across the board, we can look at problem solving. And this is, when we're looking at this, we're thinking about not just the skills, but the application of the skills in context. And this is where our students struggle the most with this assessment and also on our SOLs. So moving forward differently, some of the things that we're doing, we readjusted again, as Gwen said, our PD day, our January PD day. We decided we are really going to dig into problem solving, and we utilize our non-negotiables to do so. So we had all of our K-12, they all received training on using the reading strategies of close reading, in which we're talking about reading the problem, the task, more than one time with a purpose each time. So the first time you might be reading to decide and summarize what is this problem about. The second time you might read to annotate, underlining and circling important information. And the third time you might read after you've solved it to ask yourself, does this make sense? So we went through this strategy with all of our teachers to make sure that they had some reading strategies, some connection to reading strategies in mind as they are having their students process problems and tasks. We then moved into thinking about what interventions we could model and provide for classroom teachers. And one of the really big ones is breaking it down and using the graphic organizer. The graphic organizer could be a problem-solving strategy. I recognize that, and we have shared that. We have a 5-step problem-solving strategy. However, for some students, they have their own way to process through a problem, and we want to honor that. So if some students have a 4-step process in which they read the problem, they underline the important details, they may pull out the numbers that make sense to do an operation with, and then they go back and they check. Other students need those additional pieces of reading it 2 and 3 times. So we wanted to honor individual students' ideas. So when we're saying a graphic organizer, we do have a recommended one. However, we want to be able to allow students to process and show us how they best can work through a problem as well. Another strategy, an example of another strategy, is a numberless word problem strategy, in which, again, we're pulling out the numbers and asking the students to make sense of what the problem is asking them. So if we think in terms of reading, it's basically pulling out the numbers and summarizing what's the problem about, what is it asking, what do you know, what do you need to know. Some of those older school type problem-solving strategies, going back to that and just making sure the students understand what the problem is asking them. Again, this all circles around the idea that we know that we have to dig back into skills. And the beauty of STAR is that we can look at those individual student reports and figure out which skills are holding the students back in terms of, we can go down to fractions, or we can be very specific with division or solving inequalities. But once they have ownership of those skills, how do they then deal with those skills in a problem-solving context? So we can definitely drill down to that. The final thing one of the final things we're doing new is on that PD day, we centered all of our work around a new resource from the Virginia Department of Education, and this resource is called Rich Math Task. So what they did is they actually had teachers from around the state use certain tasks, and as they used the task, they shared the information back with VDOE, and it includes student work, it includes a rubric, it includes anchor papers that go along with it, and we had this as a real center of our work with our teachers. So as the teachers were thinking about how we can read, write, communicate, and think critically in math classrooms, we were utilizing this new resource. So now they have this as an additional piece that they can utilize in their classrooms. We wanted them to also see that you can differentiate this tool. You can actually tweak some of the tasks to make sure that we are hitting all the levels that we need to. In terms of data analysis, and I believe Gwen talked about how we're using the STAR data to analyze and really show our our math specialists and our Title I teachers. So at our upcoming February meeting with our math specialist, and I believe Gwen is doing the same thing with her reading specialist, we're going to go back through the process that you see here of looking at grouping students. And when we were at the school, Gwen mentioned that we regrouped the students, and we also went back to STAR and we said, look, in STAR, you can make groups of these new students according to their needs. And then you can look at your DBA data and you can use that as well, and you can compare, all right, well, how do we need to adjust again? So we're digging in with them at our meetings to show them how to do it. We have pictures and everything of our posters that we made. And it's not all neat, but it became something that we're very proud of, and we want them to have ownership to be able to do that as well. And the monitoring piece, I went back today, just to figure out where they were with this process, and we've been emailing back and forth, and then restructuring the support from our office to make sure that we're able to be there and support as well. And finally, as we're looking at the walkthroughs, we have several that are lined up that we're doing together. We're doing a couple, and then we're doing some individually. But having whether it's a middle school, the department chair with us, or the principal, or the math specialist, to be able to go in and really look at those problem-solving strategies. Going back to what we shared with them in January, where are we with actually implementing these strategies, and what further PD do we need to put in place? What further support, what further resources do we need to put in place? Especially with the close reading, what reading strategies are you using, or do you still need support with and putting in place in terms of problem solving? And the video resources, not just the one that we shared on that day, but an additional one has been shared since then that I want to make sure that our math specialists and our administrators have in place to support with problem solving. And finally, that the data analysis walkthrough, if we're not doing it with Tier 3 schools, that's our fault. So we're going to make sure that we are in there and doing this with them. So the one that we did, the work that we did with the data analysis with the one school, we want to duplicate that with other schools as needed as well.
Great. Questions? Questions, Ms. Martin?
Okay, so how often are you have these professional developments throughout the year? How often do you have these professional developments by course?
With the math
Or by
specialists,
sub-
or?
Well, by subject, right? So that you see, I mean, like you said, you can pull apart and put the students in groups to see what they need to work on, and then make sure that the teachers have the tools that they need to help that student moving forward, or those groups of students moving forward. So are you also doing this with reading? Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's what I assumed. So how often are you having these? Is it summer, winter, or is it quarterly as you're taking the test?
So the major one that we do, the all-district staff day, that, the professional learning day, that one is the August and then the January one. Now, in between there, we meet with the specialists and we do the PD with them according to the latest data that we have. In addition to that, when our specialists and we are in buildings, we have to respond to the data that we see, whether it be from a unit assessment. When we say we're in the buildings and planning, it's usually a planning/PD, because we're going to make sure that we address any needs that we see from the data or any upcoming content that we need to model right there in the planning with the teachers. In addition to that, we do have PLCs that meet, groups of teachers that meet together if we see a common need, or if we see one school that's doing a great job of something and that school wants to lead some sessions and support other schools with that. We do organize those as well. I have one next week, a lesson study coming up for our middle school collaborative teams, SPED teams, and we're doing that.
So are you doing this in all of the schools, or did I hear you say that some of them you haven't been doing it in?
So when we...
It's to the level of,
So
an
with
all-staff day, it's everyone.
It's everyone.
Well, I mean, this test is being given in all of our schools, right? So the professional development, like the hands-on, like what you're talking about throughout the year, is that happening in every
So
school?
when we meet with our specialists
Right,
and we
that's a
share
train
with the
the trainer.
specialists, then it's train the trainer. So then they go back and share in their
So every school
schools.
has access to
Yes.
all the teachers have
definitely.
access to the same information.
Because it's only 2 of them,
There's
so they have to
there's
train
50
department chairs and
Right.
reading
I understand what
specialists.
the train the trainer is, but, so that's what I'm trying to get at, to make sure that we have these resources is trickling down to every,
Right.
every schoolhouse.
And we meet monthly with reading specialists and department chairs. So we try, that's our pipeline to each school. And then we have tiered the schools and determined who needs us the most, that we can help support that school.
And in addition to that, this year, Mrs. White and Mrs. Collins, they're in front of building principals every month. We didn't have them in front of building principals last month because we had another professional development session that was pertinent and we needed to have, but they're in front of principals every month, giving them the tools that they need so they can develop look-fors, do walkthroughs together, and things of that nature.
Thank you.
Which is really created a whole cycle of information that we can make sure it goes to the administrator, then to the reading specialist, department chairs, to teachers. So we're making sure everyone's receiving the same message.
And in buildings where we
Consistency.
don't have a building
Right,
reading
we have
specialist or math
support.
specialist, we have another person who attends the meeting and brings that information back.
Are there any other questions? So before we transition on, oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Campson, sorry. I did not see your hand. Go ahead.
First, I want to thank our two specialists here, our two coordinators, because they've really made such a great effort to give us what we've asked for, which is precise data, and tell us what they're doing in response to the data. I think that that's a lot of things that the board's been looking for, so I think that's great. Also, just have to make a little remark about the budget that we're now developing. Last year, we asked for more reading and math specialists, and this just tells us how we need more. I know we can't staff it all because we lost so many during the cuts that we had trained during the last Grow Your Own program. Good thing we didn't lose y'all, but we lost a lot. So that's another place to put money, is to start growing our own, maybe with a commitment to stay at least 3 years or something.
Right, definitely.
Yeah.
Taking notes on
That's-
this.
Yeah, let's
That's
not
a-
train them and they
that's
go
a
someplace
minor.
else. Okay, thank you, ladies, great job.
Point well taken. Thank you. Any other questions? Then, okay, so then before we move into the principal discussion, I do want to, again, thank you for the presentation. I think it's very clear and concise, and it really brings us back home to the first part of your presentation, which talks about the school board goals, accountability for the academic achievement. This is about understanding where our baseline is, transparency with the data, coming into that check-in, figuring out where we are, and then hearing from you, which is really refreshing. What are the interventions being done so that we realize where we need help, realize the grows, and we're putting forth that intervention that's needed, whether it be to bring the children up that are doing well or to bring the ones up that need a little extra help. And again, this also ties back into the subgroup data, the achievement gaps. And so I do appreciate that data as well. So, ready to move on to the next session?
Great, thank you,
Thank
Mrs.
you.
Collins, Mrs. White. So Dr. Phillips and Mrs. Felleton, they will be approaching the table. Karen Phillips serves as the principal of Tidewater Park, and Mrs. Felleton is the principal at Taylor Elementary School, W.H. Taylor. And so it will be interesting for the board to hear from a building principal's perspective, what they are doing as it relates to professional development, how they're working with curriculum and instruction, and working with their teachers to improve the success of children. So I'm not sure who's going to go first. It looks like
Age before beauty.
which means who's going first?
I
Move the slide, there we go, Taylor.
Okay, Mrs. Felleton is going
All right.
first.
We'll flip-flop. I took a little bit of a different perspective on how to look at the STAR data. I know that STAR offers us many different reports, but each of us principals kind of use it in different ways. The teachers throughout the district, I think you'll find, they all use grade equivalency. Parents hear grade equivalency, they understand grade equivalency. It's just kind of easier to explain. But the data that I'm sharing with you is based on a report called Pathway to Proficiency. And so each grade level, as they take the test at the beginning of the year, and then they take the test again in December, it tells us the students, their growth rate. So if a student is on an accurate growth rate to meet minimal proficiency in the spring, they will be on their pathway to proficiency according to this STAR record. Now, if a student is below the proficiency, that means that student's growth is just not fast enough, and that we have to look at it a little bit differently and come in with different types of interventions. So the data that I have displayed
speaks to that a little bit with third, fourth, and fifth. I did pull the pink line as being December of 2018, the same cohort of students, of where their pathway was to proficiency to meet minimal expectations on the SOL test. Now, looking at the middle line, that takes us to where our students were in September and how many of them were on target. You know, that means approximately within that grade point range to meet that minimum proficiency at the end of the year. And then the purple line designates where they are in December. So of course you want to see that line increase because we want to see more students that are making the accurate strides at the accurate pace to meet minimal proficiency. But what else this this report also provides us is when you look at the children individually, it looks at their scaled scores. So I found that it is almost exactly dead on when you look at the scale score alignment, and the children that just squeaked through on the pathway to proficiency tend to be our children that qualify for retakes, or the ones that are going to be kind of our fence on the fence at the end of the year. So it just kind of is a different way to look at it so that no student can hide until the very end. So we know who our top performers, our highest achievers are, but we also know the students that we have to dig a little bit deeper into and provide extra support to. So I'm very pleased. It's been a wonderful year. So our students are making great strides. Our DBAs do mimic this data in a way so that there are students that we see that are struggling on DBAs that are still not on pathway to proficiency based upon this STAR report. So as you look at some of the things that we are doing and how I use that data is Aura has created a spreadsheet for us. It's kind of like a treasure trunk of all the data that we have on all of our students. And so my instructional technology specialist has pulled that data into what I call my data profiles for each of my students. And so when we meet and we get the STAR data, the DBA data, and I don't have a picture of it, but what we end up doing is it pulls that data from that Aura spreadsheet and compiles it into a complete picture of the child with what we have. So grades, STAR, DBA, attendance, discipline, ELL, I mean, it's just a complete picture. And so when we do that, we meet with teachers, and this is how we look at the students who need different tiers of levels of instruction. And so when we talk about where to go based upon the STAR data, STAR gives us reports that tell us, okay, this is Charlene's data, and this is what Charlene needs to move in order for her to catch up to growing a little bit faster in order to meet that proficiency. So, you know, each child will get a special report, and it's given to the teacher or my intervention staff, and it stars, you know, go into this spot, this is where she needs to grow to make up specific gains for that growth. So again, there's lots of pieces of data that we have. We just had to be very creative on how to pull it together and come up with a very strategic process for being very precise in what we provide students through interventions and small group instruction. So that's just a different way to look at the data. But also we have school-wide strategies that we are working on. Our focus school strategy, as we say, together we SOAR, and the acronym SOAR stands for Summarizing Across All Contents. Organization, teaching our children note-taking skills, those executive functioning skills that our students really need explicit instruction. How to take a note, how to study, how to complete a thinking map, how to just organize information so that you remember it. Active engagement, I think we're all looking for that magic recipe there to keep our students engaged at all times. So we've had professional development on engagement. And then, of course, coming in with that reading for enjoyment. So we stick with those strategies, and we have for, this is my 4th year, so we keep, you know, talking about it, keeping it in the forefront. So that's been very successful for us as well. The other piece that we use is the district has purchased a program called IXL for us. IXL is a computer-based practice program that is driven by specific standards. And so when my teachers get their data for this child, and it says Charlene needs practice with multiple meaning words, The teachers go into IXL, they find that skill, and they push that skill to the child. So it's very prescriptive to say, this child needs summarizing, comparing nonfiction text, and it just pushes it out. So the teacher, yes, is going to cover it in small group, but the child is getting it individually in these practice programs that the district has purchased. So that's kind of a very cool tool to kind of keep it efficient and keep it very prescriptive to each child. So that's been working very well for us. We started with IXL with math, and the last 2 years we've pushed in with reading as well. And then finally, just district strategies that we're using. Throughout the school, we have a Read With Me program. I have volunteers throughout our community. Some are students, some are grandparents, some just come in from the Civic League, as I've spoke with them. They get trained on how to help our children just with early literacy skills, so they come in and read with our children in K-1. When we look at guided reading, we are pushing time and text because our teachers talk more than the students read, as we've found, so we keep pushing, let them read, and reduce the amount of talking that you do. Changing our focus of small groups as to not just guided reading, but strategic grouping based on our results. And the other one that we work really hard with is looking at student work protocols. We take a teacher that brings an entire class set of student work. We have the teacher present the activity, and we all just look at the student work that the teacher has presented. And the teacher can't say anything. And then we go in, and this is learned through focus schools, and we have conversation about how to scaffold. Why did this child have such success and this child struggle? Is this a special education child? How could that special educator scaffold that and help that child be more successful? So it's really opened our teachers' eyes to collaboratively discussing student work, which may have been something that people kind of kept to themselves in the past, but it's a real collaborative process that has been very effective for us. And finally, we do have 2 part-time tutors that come in for just 3 hours a day, twice a week for math and reading, and that is through safety net funding. So we're working hard, we're getting some results, but there's always room to grow.
Just like Mrs. Felleton does at Taylor, we triangulate our data as well to ensure that we're meeting the needs of all of our boys and girls. But I feel compelled to express that in my 29 years in Norfolk Public Schools, it's been my experience that any intervention or any strategy that we employ with teachers, we have them to use with our boys and girls, is only as good as the practitioner. And so it's been critical for us at Tidewater Park to make certain that we have practitioners who are trained in the area of delivering reading instruction and math instruction. And so we've worked very hard to hire and retain teachers who have a proven track record of moving those children who are unmotivated at times to learn. And so we've been very fortunate to maintain that roster of teachers for the past 8 years, for the most part. And when I think about the years of experience that the teachers have at Tidewater Park School, the least amount of years a teacher has is at 4.5, all the way up to 32 years of experience. My reading teachers have either been reading specialists or reading interventionist or math interventionist. They're definitely teacher leaders. So I attribute our success definitely to Tier 1 instruction at first, because we have teachers who have a belief system that those children over in the area of Young Terrace and Tidewater Gardens are able to learn. They may learn at a different pace, and in different ways, of course, like all children. But the belief system, the expectations, and the culture that we've established as a team there is definitely related to the things that happen there as it relates to student improvement. And our children continue to grow. No, we are not where we would like to be, and we're striving to get where W.H. Taylor is. However, we are trending in the right direction, so we're going to stay the course at Tidewater Park School. I want to share with you the day in the life of a teacher, first of all, at Tidewater Park School. They are expected to follow the curriculum framework, the NPS pacing guide. They're expected to utilize VDOE resources. And they're expected to use the reading annotations that Ms. Collins talked about prior to us coming up to the podium. And our teachers are very well-versed in utilizing that material. And so, again, our children are expected to show what it is they've been taught to do. And they are, if you would look at their results, you can see that they are, meeting those expectations and those goals. The same for the student. That student is expected to be able to maintain appropriate pace and to problem solve and to record and have their goals in mind, and they record them in their data books is where I was going with that. And then they are able to compare each quarter that they're given the universal screening. They're able to see if they're trending up, if they're going down, and what they need to do. The teachers have a conference with them, and they talk about what they need to do to improve their STAR performance, be it in math and or reading. Our children are asked to justify their answers on a daily basis, so that if you can justify your answers, if you can pick out the keywords in a text and or in a math word problem, then you're able to solve it more easily. So those are the things that we find to be helpful, along with all of the reports and the information that Mrs. Fellerton shared with you at Tidewater Park School. Sketchnoting being one of those things, yes.
An example.
You want to point some of those things out, Dr.
Certainly,
Phillips?
certainly. We use the KAJ process, which is the keyword, answer, and justification. So when a child is given a passage, they are expected to find the keywords that may help them to comprehend that text. Then they are asked to provide how they got their answers and justify it. Where did you find it in that paragraph? So if you see out to the side, they're making notes about each of the paragraphs, and it helps them when they come to the questions. It helps them to be able to answer. It keeps them more focused, because our children are challenged in the area of reading. Some of them, not all of them. But this process of KAJ and the process of sketchnoting helps them to dissect the paragraphs to the point where they're able to comprehend what it is they've read, and then, again, summarize and then answer questions appropriately.
Do you have a sample of your student data books that you referenced?
Yes, and I think if you would go to the next slide, I think it comes up. But yes. Did it come there? Okay, there we are. Where the children have to graph where they are in September, December, and then again in the spring. And they can tell, where they're headed and if they're going in the right direction. And it coincides with the report that we get at the end of the STAR. We have the STAR. If you'll look at the last slide, we have the instructional planning report.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, is it there? It's not that slide, but it's the last slide. But at any rate, that slide will tell us what we need to do to help the children. But they are able to look at where they are when they graph their data, and then the teachers conference with them to share with them how much growth they need to make, and then the teachers, strategize with them plans that they can, that they make. They strategize, and then they come up with plans, and the children move along.
Questions? Okay, questions. Ms. Campson?
Y'all finished your presentation?
Yes, please.
Ms. Felton,
Yes.
question for you. I was looking at the slide
Yes.
where you're tracking where the kids are, and you'll be doing one for the late spring.
Yes.
At the end of the year. So when you look at the percentage of your children, as you go up this, like we're looking across here at the percentages, if you look at the percentage of the children who are scoring at a proficient level, which is grade level proficiency, do you see a tight correlation between the end of the year STAR and the SOL pass rate? The percentage of children who are scoring at proficiency on the STAR is aligned pretty close. I mean, I
Very
found it
close.
really
It's
close
very
in math, right on spot, and pretty close in reading, too.
It's pretty close,
It's a good
yes.
predictor.
We can predict which children, like I said, with that pathway report, tells us which children are going to need a lot of extra support, and then which of our students are going to be sitting on that edge. And, you know, now that we're doing that retake piece, it helps us really prepare
And
that
that
we're going to have
really-
to watch them close.
And that really helps you focus where your interventions go, because you're hoping that your SLL score will be higher than the last star,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
Because that shows the interventions that you did.
Yes.
Good use of it. Thank you.
Just along the same lines, though, I'm just thinking more long-term, especially once we get into middle school, because I'm pretty sure 8th graders are starting their pre-SATs and pre-ACT testing. So, you know, is this help not just with the SOLs, but it should be, I mean, obviously, we want to teach for real life, right? So, I mean, do you have any data to show how this might be helping students with their ACT, SAT scores in the long run? Maybe from the middle school years up?
I feel pretty confident when we move our students who are proficient readers out of the 5th grade, they stay within that proficiency throughout that middle school. The ones that are avid readers and avid seekers of information, you know. I do find, though, if you'll notice in the data, that the growth slows down a lot in 5th grade. It's very slight, and I'm not sure if that's because of the standards that are within the STAR test that are being assessed as it adjusts in 7th, 8th, and 9th as they move up, if they are just standards that the teachers aren't really touching with them, so they're not going to be as proficient on that STAR because it's outside of their grade level expectation. So
Yeah, I mean, I know the, having taken those tests in the GRE a couple times, but I mean, I know that a lot of the things that they need to know for those vocabulary tests, the sections aren't really words that you use a lot. I mean, those are more mature words, and so if there's not as much growth happening from 5th grade on, I'm just concerned that we might not be preparing our students as well as we, you know, maybe our expectations aren't set as high as they probably should be. I'm just something to think about.
Mr. Clanton?
So, I heard about the IXL,
Yes.
right, so program, and I think I heard the district got this, so Tower Park has the same program.
Have it.
I see Achieve 3000, I know that's been around for a while. Achieve 3000?
No.
Okay. But Achieve 3000 at Taylor. Smarty Ants?
Smarty Ants is the little brother to Achieve 3000.
Okay.
So it's that early phonetics, fluency, sight words, phonics, those types of skills that are introduced pre-K. I have it in pre-K, K1, and what happens in 2nd grade is that they eventually test out of they are proficient in all the standards in Smarty Ants, and they're supposed to be able to roll right into Achieve 3000. However, we have found that Achieve is still a little too sophisticated for our 2nd graders, and I have spoken with the vendor and the trainers within Achieve 3000, and they are working on a bridge program, but I haven't seen that come out yet.
So, thank you for that.
Sure.
So it's still at the school level to make the determination what extra programs, I guess, you would use to help support
With the exception
instruction?
of what the district purchases, yes.
Okay.
So, because we use the IXL reading.
Okay.
Where she's using Achieve 3000, we use IXL reading, and we also use Myon,
Okay.
which gives our children access to over 5,000 stories that they can select based upon their interest. And then they've already taken a pretest, so the pretest gives them the story at their reading level in Myon. So that's how we're able to address the differentiated
Difference in that one.
lessons.
And so there's some type of clearinghouse district-wide about which programs we're using. The reason why I'm asking this is that if we find that something's working really well, would we not replicate that across the district? And I know you have options that are there.
And I think that's why we leave it up to the building principal, because
Right.
they know their population of
Population.
children best, and so they tailor what their children need. You know, they purchase the programs that they
They
believe
feel that
will
they-
best
got
meet
it.
the needs of their children.
Right, because we did try Achieve 3000, and it was it was a little bit too
Too
difficult for our
there.
children. Yes.
So as far as budget-wise, school budget, you send it in to say this is what we need for these types of software, and are we making sure that that's equitable across the district per school?
Equitable, I would consider it equitable,
Okay.
because the Title I funds have been given to the schools
Got
who
it.
meet the criteria for Title I. And so that's the funding source that I use to purchase any computer programs that I may have for
The
our
Taylor's
boys
not
and
Title
girls.
I, right?
They're not Title I, no.
So, in your instance, how does that look?
In my instance, I have
talked
relationships
about
with
that.
downtown and central admin and different departments, realize that these programs are beneficial to our students, and they work with me to supplement, to help, and to make sure that that happens so that we're not missing out.
Great, thank you.
Ms.
Brings
Martin?
up something that we talked a lot about over the weekend at the NSBA conference about a lot of areas are struggling with how to make sure that these children have access once they leave the school to these programs that are, that we want them to be using. And so I'd like to know your input on it and if maybe you're finding this as a problem in your schools and if what you're doing to solve it, what your thoughts are. But also, I think this is a conversation, maybe goes into, I was thinking about our climate survey, maybe goes into that. We really focus on technology outside the classroom.
Well, I got nervous, so I left part of that out of my
Yeah.
presentation. I know you could tell that I was nervous.
No, not at all.
But one way that we are meeting the needs of our children after school as it relates to technology, reading, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, homework help, science fair help, is that we have the Boys and Girls Club housed in our building. We also work very closely with the Norfolk Public Library, specifically the Slover branch, as well as the branch near the Huntersville section of Norfolk. And we also have a very good partnership with United Way. And so many of those people come in the after-school programs that we have. We have an after-school program, but we also have the Boys and Girls Club housed at Tidewater Park School. So many of our children remain after school. So we're there sometimes between 6 and 7 o'clock at night. So the children are privy to the media center, to our computer lab, to computers within the classroom, because our lights are still on after hours to meet those children's needs and to
internet
give them
access.
help.
And internet access?
Yeah.
Internet access, definitely there, yes.
Okay.
So that's how we, try to make certain that they're able to practice IXL. The teachers assign, like Charlene said, the children are assigned things to work on in IXL based upon their instructional planning report that we get at the end of STAR. They're given those assignments, and the children can go right into that computer and click on what the teacher assigned and start to work on that particular skill or concept.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Basine?
Can both of you speak to how you're incorporating, if and how you're incorporating culturally responsive teaching in terms of even providing access and exposure for students who, are reading materials, that are of students that look like them or that come from family structures that they're more connected with. Can you speak to that and how that you're using that to engage your students?
Our media center is starting to really pay attention to the collection and the diversity within the collection. So our media specialists will often share with teachers different texts that go along with different units, and have children that look like them, children that come from neighborhoods, or just different things for them to enjoy. But it is difficult because those texts, there's lots of wonderful things out there, but it is, for me, not Title I, it is difficult for me to purchase those and get them into the classrooms and things of that nature.
Okay.
I have a couple of teachers who will stay and do a Boys to Men club, and that's for my young men that just need that positive role model, that influence, and goal setting, and self-confidence, and how to tie a tie, those types of things. But the barrier of that is I cannot provide transportation. So the children that I need to get the most into my building for these after-school clubs and opportunities are the children that I can't transport. And so that becomes a barrier of access to extracurricular and things that would help supplement their need.
Okay. And how can the school board, I guess, help support you, support both of you in any efforts to increase, that culturally responsive teaching and support?
I would love to have transportation because we have wonderful after-school clubs. We have reading clubs, and my PTA is very active. They pull in people from the live, but that population that I need to get isn't able to be transported. And we did try to do a family engagement night. We partnered with the rec center over at Lambert's Point, and we did an entire reading night where they did activities, and that was very well attended because our parents could walk, from our neighborhoods and come to that site and location to enjoy it. So that was important to us, but something that we have to maintain.
And I keep looking to her, Mrs. Basine, because we don't have that as a barrier. Transportation is not a barrier for us. Many of our children walk, and the Boys and Girls Club will support us with their buses, and then we have Title I funds to pay for transportation. So providing after-school activities is not difficult for us. And in response to what you asked about culturally responsive exposure, we have increased the number of books that we have in our media center, as well as the classroom libraries that are centered around African American, Latino, and also Caucasian, because our clientele has changed. So we're being very specific and intentional about the materials that we purchase and provide for our boys and girls.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Ms. Martin?
Well, I mean, I know how, as a board member, I can help. So I work at the Sliver, I'm the executive director of the Sliver Library Foundation, so my office is at Sliver Library and work very closely with that staff and also with the Norfolk Public Library as a whole. And I'm the liaison for the school board, and so we talk a lot about how, and I know that they're very integrated, both departments, and so we talk a lot about how we can keep, they love coming into the schools.
Love it.
And so if you need more culturally diverse books, or maybe on loan, we can help. I can definitely help put you in the right, in touch with the right people, because they would be really excited to do that.
We actually have scheduled some appointments already made for visits from people from the Norfolk Public Library.
Okay.
So, and I don't want to prolong it, but I'm just sitting here a little perplexed because I went to Taylor and I went to Lawrence when I lived in Lambert's Point and Park Place. But I remember even being in elementary, having after-school programs and being able to have a bus on Tuesday and Thursdays, I do believe. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around, because there is a barrier. We've got a railroad track, though there's an underpass. But to have kids walk that far all the way to Taylor Elementary, it's one thing, and I don't know if we do that. I mean, it may have been something that changed long. It's been a long time since I've been to Taylor
I think
Elementary.
you're using your safety net funding.
Yes,
that?
yes. My safety net funding, I use to pull in my part-time tutors into the building for remediation. I do not have a full-time literacy or reading specialist, so I need somebody to come in and meet the children in the building and work there, and so I'm able to fund that position using that safety net. So it's kind of, I have to pick, where I can get the most growth and the most specific audience.
But I think that even the possibility in Lambert's Point, I know First Baptist Lambert's Point is a very active church that's there. You said the rec center, there might be some opportunities to do some continued,
Right.
because I just remember growing up as a kid there, that there was a tutoring program, retired teachers and some active teachers that were at the church, and a lot of the kids who went to Taylor and Larchmont went there.
Yes,
for
they still
support.
do that.
And they still do that,
yes,
great.
Yes.
So I have two questions then. The first question is, What do you need to be successful as a building level principal? The second thing is, I heard very strongly from Dr. Phillips, having that professional, that practitioner in front of the children who, number one, understands the non-negotiables. Every child can learn. You have to believe that success is capable. I hear you loud and strong. So the second question is, what would you say to future educators or individuals who are considering a field of teaching to say, why would you want to do this? What is rewarding about it? Why do you do what you do? Because right now we have a national teacher shortage. I mean, it's everywhere.
Yes.
So what would you say, being 27 years experience?
29.
29? 29, I don't want to say you those 2 years. The years of experience that you both have. So what do you need to be successful as a building level principal? And then the teaching aspect of it. Why teaching?
Time. Can we slow down the clock a little bit? Oftentimes, we were talking about the years of experience between our two schools, and believe it or not, she has a much more veteran staff than I do, because at Taylor I have 5 of 15 teachers that are probationary. So I'm undergoing kind of a shift in, my teaching staff. And they're coming out and they're not ready out of teacher preparation programs, and they're just not ready to meet the rigor and the expectation of a teacher's schedule, of constant demands outside of the classroom, inside of the classroom, reading data and reacting to that data, training. When I was at Fairlawn, we used to have Thinking Thursdays, and teachers would just stay after and do professional development with us because they're like sponges. They just want the information. But we roll so fast throughout the year, we don't have that time often to slow down and get the PD that we really need to keep our instruction at the top, especially with new teachers. Time.
I would tell a prospective teacher that she or he would need to have a passion and a desire to see children perform, all children, in any environment. I would tell them that if they don't have that, then it makes no sense to pursue education. We can teach you how to teach, but we can't teach passion. We can't teach a belief that all children can learn regardless of their home life. So if you have the passion and if you have the desire to see them learn and accelerate, we're your people.
All right.
And relationships. It's about relationships.
Certainly is
Our
about
most proficient
relationships.
teachers are really good with getting to know their students and establishing those relationships
All
with them.
around.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your personal experiences with your schools. You're doing tremendous work. We thank you so much for what you do each and every day for our students. Dr. Birdsong, thank you for pulling together this really wonderful academic review and data.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing us.
Thank you.
This is their work.
Yeah,
so.
I'm gonna give y'all a hand. And believe it or not, we are ahead of schedule. So we are going to keep on rolling then. So we are going to move on to item 4.01, our policy discussion. Ms. Martin, Ms. Basine head up our policy committee. Would you all like to go ahead and lead us into the policy discussion for policy BDDH-KD?
Yes, our recommendation is to accept it, but I know you have some addition that you wanted to add from the email?
I do. I had the opportunity to review it that when it was posted on Board Docs, and I thank you all for having it posted such a timely manner. In speaking with our clerk, Ms. Tanner, we realized that it would be much, much better if we were to have a clarifying statement in there under the, let me pull my paper out real quick. Okay, so under the request to speak, if we could add the language, sign-up sheets will be available by the entryway of the meeting room and turned in at the start of the meeting at 7 PM. Believe it or not, she has the sign-up sheets placed, is it the day before? She has them out the day before, and, typically if we're here, that's perfect. If we're at a different location, that might be a little troublesome, but for the most part, the sheets are placed the day before out, and those are for individuals to come and to sign up to speak at our public comment or even a public hearing. The sheets are pulled at 7 o'clock, so it would clearly state that. Requests can be made in advance with the clerk of the board via electronic email at the school board email or by phone by 4:30 on the day prior to the business meeting or public hearing. And that is really to avoid any accidental mistakes of individuals who have emailed or called during the day of a meeting. Ms. Tanner is exceptionally busy on a day of a meeting, copying, adjusting presentations, working out logistics. She would hate to miss somebody who wanted to speak. And so what I'd like to propose in this policy is to say that the day before at 4:30 PM, that's when the cutoff is for the electronic or the phone call sign-up is. And then when they come the day of, they have the ability to sign up until 7 o'clock. So that's my recommendation, again, based on feedback. And I would like for the policy to reflect that change if the board agrees upon it. Are there any questions? Okay. Ms. Pacine?
I guess I would like more clarification on I'm just thinking through the 4:30 the day prior, how that time was determined. I've seen some districts say noon, the day of, but, a whole day prior is a little bit restrictive, I think.
Right, and we actually, we were talking back and forth about that, and it's really just based on her feedback that that day is just so busy with different items coming through that in order to not miss anybody, the 4:30 timeframe was suggested.
So are we finding that we are missing people then during the public comment periods, or?
Ms. Tanner,
is that?
please?
We had a specific situation where someone was here, and when I went back to check her email, she emailed it at 6:40.
Oh.
So it's
The day of.
impossible to be
Yeah.
able to
Yeah.
do it up
That I
until
can
that time.
understand, yeah.
So,
Yeah, that I can understand, sure.
yeah, and then we have 3 different ways. They can email myself and 2 other email accounts. So it's like I will be constantly running back and forth, checking 3 different email accounts to see if I missed somebody the day
yeah,
of.
That I can understand, certainly, within the hour of starting our meeting, that would certainly be difficult. But again, I'm questioning the day before the meeting seems a little early to be cutting it off, in my opinion.
And so I'll speak to that because when it was brought to me about, what do you think about this? I said 12 noon, the day of. But then I began to, because, I've seen other boards and so forth, but then we began to have discussion, what are we offering? And we're offering a lot of different ways for people to sign up. And so electronic, telephone, cutting it off 4:30 the day before. Well, if you're coming to give public comment, then you're coming to the location. And so we're saying to 7 o'clock, you still have an opportunity to sign this form. And so I wanted to be the same way. I didn't want to be restrictive to a point where it kind of felt like people weren't given an opportunity, but then I also wanted to make sure that if you called or sent an email, and even the clerk sending a confirmation, we've received this, that would give enough time for them to do that on the morning of the board meeting so that they knew that they were on the list, and then those who were still coming in still had an opportunity to sign in. So I thought about the same thing at 12, but then I was like, if we want to add that extra level of customer service in that respect, if we did it by 4:30, it gave enough time for the clerk to handle all the many different things that were going on, make sure all the things were on board docs. And so that's why I'm in agreement with doing it at 4:30 the day before and still having the form out there, which is out there at the same time, and allowing people to sign up.
personally would still like to see the day of. I mean, I respect that. But, you know, I think right now we should be offering all the customer service that we can provide. And I think perception, you know, I've received a lot of feedback about even, you know, this pilot period, this splitting of agenda and non-agenda items, and how that feels restrictive. And so I think adding that layer of cutting, you know, having a cutoff time that's the day prior to the meeting, I think that also, in my opinion, adds to the notion that we're trying to restrict public comment or dissuade public comment, and so for me, that's an issue.
So I understand that. God
Bless you.
Bless you. So let's just be clear about what we're saying here. We are saying that agenda items will be posted on the Friday before a meeting, so it's posted. We've committed to that.
Yes.
Let's also say that you can email or call the clerk at any time to speak up until the day before at 4:30. And if you still want to come and speak for public comment, you have until 7 o'clock the day of to come and sign in on the sheet. So if you don't make it for the phone call, or if you don't do the email, you are still more than welcome to come, sign in, sit at the 7 o'clock meeting, and make your comment. So 3 different ways that you can come. I think it meets everyone where their needs are, and then it meets our expectations to make sure that we are handling all the comment appropriately through the clerk who's managing it, so that we do not miss anybody. But
And one more thing, I mean, how many jobs are you working right now? Okay.
2.
I mean.
And with that
in-
said, I'm just telling you, the day of a school board
Pretty
meeting
busy.
is extremely busy, and as many of you know, you're emailing the clerk throughout the day for various reasons. She works very late. I mean, she's on email during the wee hours of the morning. I know that. So it's not that she's not responsive and she's not looking. It's just almost impossible for her to be able to commit to electronically being able to identify those folk and making sure that they're signed up. Now, if we did not have another avenue for people, for citizens to sign up, then that would be problematic. But if we're saying that they have up until 7 o'clock, the evening of the board meeting, to sign up, I feel like it's adequate time, in my opinion, just, you know, based on everything that goes on the day of a school board meeting. It is really extremely busy.
I think she's done a great job of working people in whenever there's been this miscommunication, if we have time too. so.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so then I would like to, as long as we have consensus here, to propose those changes. And then this edited version or red line version will appear on our consent agenda. And it will be voted on at our business meeting in the consent agenda.
So we end up with consensus?
I'm sorry, what?
We have consensus?
I can take a poll. Ms. Martin, do you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay. Mrs. Campson?
Yes.
Mr. Clinton?
Yes.
Ms. Basine?
It's fine. It's fine with me. I mean, I hear from the administration about it. I just would remind that this is policy that will withstand turnover. And so right now, while our situation may be that, you know, individuals may be wearing multiple hats and, you know, the workload may be different, I think going forward, you know, it's, again, could be someone who's dedicated to this role, and, you know, where that 12 p.m. cutoff isn't as big of a deal. I do think in a broader scheme, you know, we aligned this policy because we previously discussed that this is the pilot that the board wanted to explore. I think at some point, we'd also have to talk about when are we going to evaluate whether this pilot will be continued and whether this policy will withstand that decision. So,
All right.
say that.
In principle, I do not agree with it. We did not agree with the pilot as a board.
We did it, yes.
The pilot was determined by some members of the board, but in essence of pushing this along, I will consent to it because we will have other opportunities to address this.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, if I just can reiterate, so this is a policy that's changing, and it's not something that's coming from VSBA, and so one of the things I just wanted to make sure that we reemphasize the fact that policies, like we're coming here now, work session, we'll have a first reading, and so there won't be a vote on the business meeting. It will be an opportunity for additional discussion. And so just an opportunity to kind of slow things down, give the board the ample opportunity to have discussion, and then we'll come back in March, yeah. I can't believe we're in February already. And then we'll have the final vote on it.
Right, and Mr. Clanton, thank you for bringing that up, because that is the next step, is that we'll have the first reading February, the second reading in March, and then,
Right, so not on the consent agenda as I had said
In
before.
March.
So it's an item for discussion.
No action.
For no action, discussion only, first reading.
and we should put it out there for the community to know that, that we're doing this.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, next item, 5.01, Business and Finance, the governor's fiscal year 2020 and 2022 budget update.
I'll ask Mrs. Ingram to approach the table. This presentation was actually scheduled during January's work session, and then we ran out of time. And so the presentation you have before you, Mrs. Ingram, as she is presenting the information to you, she will provide updates because some of the information has changed.
Okay.
Mrs. Ingram, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Burson. Good evening, Dr. Gabriel, Mr. Clanton, and school board members. As Dr. Burson said, I'll be presenting basically the same document that we were going to present in January. I would just like to note that we did not change it, so in January, it says something was going to happen. Now it has happened. So if you see in here, it's not past tense. That's why, because we just didn't want to change it because it was already out on board docs and the public could have had an opportunity to look at it. So we did make that notion. And also, it's really pertaining to the governor's budget and not any other bills that have currently being presented on action on currently. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Topics for discussion. Typically, we start at each presentation of this nature talking about where we are currently. We're going to talk about our operating funds for the current fiscal year, revenue sources, expenditures. We're going to look at the K-12 enrollment trends, and then we're going to get into the governor's budget and then the city revenue funding formula. Then we're going to talk about the process, where we are, and our next steps. For our summary of original appropriation, this is what was appropriated by City Council. We have a total of $400 million, and the pie chart basically shows you the breakout. Our operating budget is $336 million. We have $40 million in grant funds. About 30 of that is federal funds. 7 million is state, and about 2.2 other types of grants. Our child nutrition budget is 20 million, and we have 4 million in CIP. Then the 4 million is broken up into 3 million for deferred maintenance and 1 million for bus replacements. What is not included in here, the additional information, if you will recall, that we submitted to City Council for a reappropriation of our 2018 undesignated fund balance. That was approved, and in the December financial statement, we shared with you what that increase was. The reappropriation was about $4.4 million. 1.2 or 1.3 million went to textbook fund because those dollars that we did not spend has to be spent on textbooks. And the other $3.1 million went to cover the overages for the furniture and fixtures for the PPEA schools. So that has been reappropriated, and we have taken care of that. For our revenue sources, we get 58% of our budget from the state, or $197 million. From the city council, $129.8 million, or 38.6%. Federal dollars is about 1.7%, or $5.6 million. And then other local miscellaneous funds is $3.2 million, for a total of $336 million. And that is based on a projected March ADM of 27,234 students. The major categories, these are the categories that's in state code that we have to report to the state when we do our state annual report. And 74.5% of our total budget goes directly into instructional support. Administration, attendance, and health is 5.9%, or $19.7 million. And also what I would like to share that's not on here, administration alone, which is the central office piece, is about $10.4 million, or 3.1% of the total budget. Transportation is about $14 million. Operation and maintenance is $37 million. Facilities is $5.2 million. The bulk of that is the construction technology funds that we get from the city, that is debt that was based on the tax increases that they use to pay the debt for our new buildings. We don't really get to spend that, but it is shown in our budget. And then our technology department budget is $9.3 million, or 2.8%. Another way of looking at our expenditures is a breakout between total compensation and non-compensation. 85% of our budget is total compensation. That includes about 4,073 full-time employees and their benefits. All of the overtime, part-time, and substitute pay is included in that for 85% of the total budget. Non-personnel are things like contract services, supplies, travel, utilities costs, some capital funding is 49.4% of our total budget. Next is just a slide to show you the enrollment trends from 2009 to what was projected for the current school year. And you can see have been having a declining enrollment. On the chart is two separate dates. You will see the blue line, which is the fall membership. That is the September 30th date that we do our staffing. The next number, the red lines, is the March ADM. That is what our actual funding is based on. And you can see the decline. And if you look at it from 2009 to 2020, our enrollment has declined, excuse me, 4,830 students of our September 30th enrollment, and the March ADM has gone down about 4,405 students in that time period. And you can also see that the decline right now is look like it's lessening a little bit, but we're still in the decline mode. Next, we're going to get into the governor's budget. As you know, it was presented on December the 7th, and it covers 2 fiscal years. Fiscal year 2021, which is starts July the 1st, 2020 through June 30, 2021, and the second year is fiscal year 2022 that starts July 1, 2021 through June 30, 2022. The General Assembly session did start on January the 8th. Some of the key recommendations that impact instruction are typically they go through the technical updates. That's where they look at the different types of incentive fundings, what has been spent. They update the baseline data, and what they're looking at also is our participation rates, what have the spending be, so that has been updated. They recompute our composite index for the new biennium, and basically in that part of re-benchmarking, the base year for that data is the 2017-2018 information, so they're like 2 years behind. They had a revision in our employee rates for fringe benefits. It does include an increase, 3% increase for salary for SOQ instructional and support position, but it's for the second year of the biennium. It starts effective July 1, 2021. So there's nothing in the governor's budget for a salary increase for fiscal year '21, current budget cycle. Some other key information, recommendations, is additional funding for the Virginia Preschool Initiative and Early Childhood Education. There is additional funding for school counselors for both years of the biennium, funding to support students who are educationally at risk in both years, additional funding to support English language learners in both years. They also have some funding that's in our CAP tool that really helps support child nutrition program. And then there is a new line for new games of skills for per pupil funding allocation. We'll be talking about that a little bit later on another slide. When we were talking about this in the leadership team, we all had good education because we didn't know exactly what that meant. So we'll get back to that a little later in the presentation.
Okay.
On page 12, now our composite index, that is the local ability to pay towards education. Our composite index actually went up from 29.58% to 30.59%. So that means the city, according to their updating of the calculation, can contribute more towards education. So if the city is contributing more, then the state will contribute a little bit less. Sales tax projection, that was updated as well. And also it was increased. In the calculation, when sales tax increases, basic aid goes down, because in the calculation of basic aid, one of the calculation is they subtract sales tax from, once you multiply the per pupil amount times the number of students and subtract out a composite index piece, they also subtract out sales tax. And the thing about it is, once it's in the budget, if it's a higher number, if our sales tax actually comes in lower, that won't change. So we still will not get the benefit because it's going to be based on the budgeted piece. Our VRS rates also change. The employer contribution will be increasing from 15.68% to 16.62%. The retiree health credit piece will be increasing slightly, and also the group, what I do not have on here, an update is the group life insurance rates will also increase slightly from 1.32% to 1.34%. And now I'm going to try to give a little bit of information on each of those topics I mentioned earlier that were increases. Of course, compensation for next year, there's nothing in the budget. The increase in funding for our SOQ for school counselors, the proposal, which is in the green highlight there, is what is in the governor's budget, that we will have 375 students to one counselor, which is a decrease from currently is 4.55 to 1 for the elementary level. So it shows you at each level what the proposal will mean for us as far as staffing and calculation and number of counselors that we will have. On the next page, increase in staffing ratio for English as a second language. Currently, it is 17 teachers per 1,000 students, and he's proposing 20 teachers per 1,000 students. The additional funding for at-risk add-on, you remember last year, I believe he was proposing in the caboose bill to increase the percentage. There was an add-on. So this year, he's doing the same thing to increase that percentage from 16% to 23%, which will give us additional money to support our at-risk students. But one of the caveats to that, the second bullet, when I tell you about the offset, is by a corresponding decrease in supplemental lottery. That's what we call a shell game. So the next bullet, you will see that supplementary lottery per pupil amount is going to go down from $366 to $314, and that reduction is going to help fund the increase in the percentage for the at-risk 4-year-olds.
How can they get away with that?
Makes no sense.
No.
That's what's being proposed. Now to the games of skills that everyone had on their mind. This is a new funding proposal for taxes. What we learned is if, we were saying, like, if you go to the 7-Eleven, they have those game machines. Evidently, a lot of those machines have been popping up throughout the Commonwealth, and they say they're having a negative impact on our lottery ticket sales. So they want to actually tax the funding of the monies from that. And if it's approved by the General Assembly, then that proposal is that we will get a percentage of that to offset some of the decrease in the lottery fund sales.
No. But if it's not approved,
If it's not approved, it comes out.
right? But I mean, do we,
We just take the hit. The children. take
well, I'm
the
just
hit.
saying, like, if it's not approved, then how did,
If it's not approved, currently in his proposed budget, he's included in that, and we can do a calculation which would be presented with Dr. Burson's presentation of her budget. But we should have a pretty good idea as to whether the House or Senate is going to also support that piece. And then once, if they approve the final General Assembly budget and it's not there, I think we will still have time to make an amendment to our budget to reduce it, within which would mean we will have to make reductions. Because if revenue goes down, then we have to reduce expenditures as well. And the estimated amount in the budget is about $1.4 million.
So what I'm hearing is that these machines are already in the little convenience stores. People are already using them. Our lottery funds are going down. There is a bill right now to say, let's tax these machines so that way we can offset the decrease from individuals who aren't buying the lotto tickets and are on the gaming machines. So what we need the public to do is to call their representatives and tell them to support this? Is that what I'm hearing?
well, we talked about it a little bit. We didn't talk about it as a board, so we didn't really say anything to them at the time. But I mean, essentially, from what I've understood with the lottery funds is that it's been put through into the general fund, and then it's being piecemealed out. So if they would just do what they originally planned and to give us a straight 3% of the revenues from the lottery, maybe that would be another option to ask for.
Because the lottery's supposed to be 100%.
100%. Which is, I mean, it's supposed to be 100%. Yeah.
It's supposed to be
Of the 3%, wasn't it
But they're
100%,
using it to
3%?
offset
Yeah.
the
To
cost.
supplement the money that they took out of the general fund.
Yeah, they're playing a shell game with, yeah.
And
Yeah.
the children are the
Yeah,
victims.
And I will add that this is all on the backs of our most vulnerable population. So it's money.
If the governor
I don't
really
know,
believes in education.
I'm not in support of
So,
anyway.
so do we need support to pass this piece if these machines are already there so that we can at least capture this funding?
I don't
I don't see it as being
support it.
sustainable. I mean, we need to come up with, we need to do better. I mean, he needs to do better than
Okay.
this.
I mean, but we have to look at that the climate within the Commonwealth is changing with this whole gaming thing. And I don't foresee the machines going away anytime soon. So, I mean, it
I mean,
means
I know
tax
that-
it, tax it.
Yeah.
and so-
I know the deeper conversation is, let's get to what the lottery funds were originally meant to be, and I understand that, and that's definitely a deeper conversation that we need to have, almost like a Pandora's box. But anyway, sorry to interrupt. Go ahead and keep
sorry.
going.
Oh, okay.
But I did want to add in here, because I know that you're giving us numbers. Can you identify in here any things that are unfunded mandates that the governor may have had in his budget that?
So far, what I have talked about is included on his calc tool as being funded.
Okay.
There are pieces later on that's in his budget. There's a lot in his budget on early childhood education. When I get back to the VPI pieces, some of those are included on the calc tool, and some of his proposals are not at the time, because they are still trying to come up with guidance as well. And some of them, they are going to be fixing as grants where you have to apply for. So what I'm talking about mainly right now is what's included as a funded piece of his budget.
Great, thank you.
Okay. The very next page is funding actions related to Virginia Preschool Initiative. Typically, all districts do not participate in the Virginia Preschool Initiative. Norfolk does. And so we have other districts who do not. And so in creating his budget, they have decreased funding per se, totally at the state level, but they have not impacted our funding. It's almost like budgeting for attrition. You budget for all salaries, but then you know you're going to have some type of savings because you won't fill everybody at the same rate. So that's kind of like a way he has funded it here, but he has not changed our allotted slots. Actually, our slots went up as to what he's projecting. The number I have here, 1248, is what was reported on our September 30th. You may recall now that our lottery funding is based on the 4-year-olds who are enrolled on September 30th. So that's what we had on September 30th. If we get additional students and serve them, we won't get funding for them, but we do provide the services to them.
Okay.
So his projection next year is that we will have 1,312 slots. They also increased the per pupil funding by approximately 10%. And also the Virginia Preschool Initiative, you may also recall that we had a grant, and the grant went away, and in this year, the state funded dollars, so they're continuing to fund dollars for the Virginia Preschool Initiative, the plus as well. And this is the next page related to Virginia Preschool Initiative. I've been telling you about grants. He has funding in there for mixed delivery add-on grants, wherein you will have to apply. Every year, I believe that May 15th is the timeline that we have to submit the application for our Virginia Preschool Initiative. So at that time, if we choose to apply for this grant, we would have to do that at the same time. And it's for the mixed delivery add-on piece. They're also doing a pilot. Let me go back, but we have 3 classes with our mixed income at Little Creek, Berkeley Campusella, and at NTC. Those are our locally funded mixed income classes. He's also has funding or proposing funding to have a pilot program for at-risk 3-year-olds. A lot of this that I'm talking about now, there has not been guidance developed or guidelines to follow, so we will still be watching what the General Assembly says about this, and we'll probably make recommendations, or Dr. Bursong will, as we get more information as to whether or not to seek out the grant-type funding, because right now we just don't know what it all entails. On the next slide, page, there is also that I don't think this is in our calc tool, Mr. Clanton, on page 18, remember correctly, additional funding for children on the VPI wait list. Here again, they're going to establish the guidelines, so right now there's not a lot to report on what's entailed with that. Expansion of public-private delivery of preschool programs. It's another new one that they will have to establish measurable academic standards for, so it's a lot of unknowns. But he does have a lot in his budget pertaining to the early childhood piece.
Okay.
So when we get additional information on this, we can share it with you. Another thing he has in there's a proposal to increase the VPI class sizes. We're still trying to get a little bit more information on that as well. Currently, we have 18 students to 1 teacher. And then we also have a paraprofessional in the classroom as well. And in this proposal, they are saying 1 teacher per 10 students, or 1 teacher and a full-time aide for 20 students. Don't know how that would go over with your teachers who are teaching little ones.
Mm-hmm.
But also there is some criteria there that it's not totally understood yet how it all will work. So again, as we get more information on that, we will share it with you.
Okay.
I don't know whether the administration or the board will recommend 20 preschoolers, 4-year-olds to a classroom or not, but that's just a proposal.
I have a question about pre-K.
Okay.
Are the public schools rated the same way the private pre-Ks are with the star rating?
I'm not aware.
Like the
of that.
ODU and like St. Patrick and other schools have the star rating for their preschools, their pre-Ks?
Are you
Like a
saying
gold star rating
or
and it's not applied?
Yeah, I don't,
Okay.
yeah.
Because there's certain criteria that you need to meet for those ratings, and I was just wondering if public schools were involved in that rating system.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not
They
sure.
don't even, what used to be, they don't even have to have certified teachers.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
I can't imagine that the criteria would be the same.
Right,
That-
yeah. I think it falls under a different category, yeah.
and then, 'cause
We can
Smart
follow up on
Beginnings
that one.
does a rating system. Smart Beginnings does a rating system.
But it's
But it's
different
different,
from,
yeah.
yeah.
It is.
Like Head Start would
Sorry.
be different, yeah.
Okay, and the last part on that, they're looking at making language that they would do benchmarking like they do with the other SOQ positions, re-benchmarking every 2 years on the biennium as well. And that will be effective with the 2022 to 2024 biennium.
So that was the question that I had been holding in, because earlier, there was some discussion about the State Board of Education was looking at making some changes in benchmarking and the SOQ, and that if the General Assembly didn't do something, then their recommendations would go forth, but there was a difference in thinking around that. It's kind of like it's up in the air as to who actually has authority over that. So I know that there's a big question about this re-benchmarking piece. I mean, I know it gets into the policy piece of it, but I'm watching it because it could affect a lot of school districts across the Commonwealth.
So are they, I'm sorry, are they saying that they're going to fund a reduction in class size through the SOQ staff alignment? Is that what they're saying?
On which one, to increase the VBI class sizes, or?
I'm on page, what page are you on?
We're on
Sorry.
19.
19,
Okay, sorry, I was a slide ahead.
okay.
They have
Oh, the K-3
class.
primary class size reduction. You know, this is where the state gives us incentive funds that, based on our free lunch percentage, that we can have smaller class sizes than what the SOQ calls for. Currently, we have 3 schools, all of our elementary schools are eligible for K-3 except 3. That's Larchmont, Taylor, and Ghent. Going forth next year, ADL will be added to that because of their free lunch percentage. ADL's free lunch percentage, that's included with that information, is like 28%, which falls less than the 30% that you need to participate in this program. So actually, there's 2 criteria. I think on the next page, I will get into the criteria that makes you eligible. So 29 of our 33 schools next year will be eligible for this reduced funding. ADL, 4 schools will change. ADL will not be eligible. Ocean View, their max class size will increase from 22 to 23, which basically it means that their free lunch percentage went up, so they can have a smaller class size. And Bayview was the opposite. Theirs went down. I'm sorry, they can have a larger class size. I said it backwards.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I
Yeah.
said it backwards.
Ms. Campson was going to catch that.
Yeah, I could hear her over there thinking about it. And Bayview's actually, theirs went down, so their class size is going to go from 24 to 23, the maximum that you can have in there. I think SOQ is like, at that grade level, maybe 24 or something like that, or 25. And then Lake Taylor, you know, we went with 3rd grade and making them 3-8 school, so they come on to be eligible because of their 3rd grade. And the first year that you come into this arrangement here, they assign you a rate. And their free lunch assignment rate is like 74%, so their max class size would be 20.
Okay. I know that Ms. Basine had a question. Ms. Basine?
Yeah, so from the schools that you just mentioned where they're there are changes, and this is something that I'd like to put a pin in and come back to, because I think it's part of a broader discussion, but how ADL no longer qualifies. So different from the other schools, it's supposed to be open enrollment, choice school, which, to me, it raises the question, are we providing equity and access to the program? And so if we're seeing a reduction in the number of, what's that?
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
seeing how you're looking at that.
so that's why I'm saying we've got to put a pin in it, because I think this question is part of the specialty program, choice program, out-of-district transfer conversation that I've been asking to have. So that's why I would like to know a little more about that, so.
Okay. All right, and we are just about over our allocated time for the presentation, so I'm just going to ask everybody to hold any burning questions that you have until the very end so we can make it through, and then we are going to limit the time on the questions so we can keep on our schedule.
Okay. The next page is just a quick overview to show our 33 schools and what category they fall into. Like, we have 4 schools who do not qualify. We have 3 schools with a max class size of 24. 4 schools with a max class size of 23, and then at the far right column is the per pupil amount that we get for each student in that school. So that's just basically information to share with you how it's broken up. I'm going to go quickly on the next few slides. Then we get into the revenue impact. Of course, I shared with you, you know that our funding is based on our projected March 31st ADM. Is contingent upon what finally comes out of the General Assembly. And we also talked about the increase in our local composite index. The expenditure impact, which Dr. Burson is working on now with the budget presentation. Our employee rates went up, so expenses will go up. Change in SOQ funding for the counselors, lower student to counselor ratio means more counselors. Staffing, due to enrollment projections, support for students with educationally at risk, support for English language learners, and any changes in VPI, any staffing changes there will impact our funding. So, next steps, we talked about it being convened. It is in session. We would probably next week or so, I think, is crossover, where the House and Senate version look at each other. So hopefully not long after that, we will be able to get an idea of what each of the House and Senate is proposing in their budget. And then we normally look at the governors, the House and Senate, and then Dr. Burson and team will decide which version to put forth in a recommendation, with the hopes of getting a final vote from the General Assembly prior to it going to City Council. However, if it does not, then we can always go back and do an adjustment based on the final before City Council vote as to what the final would be. The last slide is just information on the city revenue sharing formula. We get, according to their policy, we would get 29.55% of certain non-dedicated local tax revenue. In that, it also includes how we can go about requesting additional monies, how they go about doing the true-up. They give us estimates 3 times a year. So sometime this month, we should be receiving an updated estimate on what our funding should be for next year. Right now, the first estimate says we will get $2 million more than what we currently get this year. And this does not include the construction technology infrastructure funded that we're talking about earlier that we didn't see.
Okay.
So where are we currently? We're still gathering data, looking at departmental requests, budgeting, looking at all of these things with Dr. Burson presenting her budget, I believe, on the 19th to the school board. Once she does that, this is just another calendar of she presenting in February. March, the school board makes its deliberation, and on April 1st, we have to have the school board's budget to City Council. And that's those. And typically, the council votes in May, And then the school board will come back and vote again if there are any adjustments or changes on the adopted budget. So that's the governor's budget in general.
Thank you. Dr. Birdsong?
Do we have any questions for Ms. Ingram? And as Ms. Ingram stated, in a couple of weeks, I will be prepared to present my proposed budget, and we will discuss that at that time.
So then let's just reiterate also that on March the 4th, we're going to be having a public hearing on the budget that will be at a school, and that school we're confirming.
Yes, did we confirm it? So Granby High School.
Where?
Okay,
Granby, Granby High
That's,
School.
that's the work session.
that's our work session. So our work session on March the 4th will take
Right.
place at Granby High School, and then there will be a public hearing on the budget where we will receive comments from all stakeholders at 7 o'clock. Okay, thank you, Ms. Ingram, very much. The final item that we have on our agenda tonight is future agenda items. We will take into consideration board members who have requests for items to be considered on the agenda. Let me also state that we just completed our agenda planning this past Monday. For March, what we have on the books is a chunk of time dedicated to educational planning, which we will have an update on our school start times. We will have time allocated for policy discussion and budget. So that's what we have right now for March. And I'll go ahead and open the floor for members, again, to share their budget item, any agenda items they would like for the board to take into consideration. Ms. Basine?
One, I'd like to know that.
Can you please start the clock? Sorry. Go ahead.
At our governance training, we talked about having a running list of items. I was just wanted to know what the status of that list is. I looked on board docs to see, is it up there?
Ms. Tanner, it is.
It is?
Yes, it's under the library, and it
It's in the
says
library,
school
okay.
board,
Okay.
future agenda items. And I
Okay.
can send that out to everybody, yeah.
Okay.
And the
All
list
right.
is there.
Thank you. So in addition to what's already there, two things just for the next closed session is an update on Bayview, and then I'd like at some point for us to talk about open campus. I don't think we've had an update on that in a while, so I'd like, that could be incorporated into specialty our program update whenever that is given, hopefully soon, but wherever you see fit. But I would like to put that on our agenda at some point to discuss that program.
Okay, great. Ms. Martin?
So when do we plan to get Ron Jordan and Jonna Cassaboon back here to give us legislative update? Is that going to be after General Assembly? Because don't we normally do that?
Typically, when they come back.
Okay,
But
so,
if you want them to come back prior to that time, we can request
well, I was just
that.
wondering if maybe we could
March.
work in a I guess we're almost about mid-session, but in the next month or so, work in an update as well, unless you guys are satisfied with you're just getting the updates like we are, right, the paper updates?
Is everyone's receiving the updates from,
That she's sending, yeah.
from the Advantage Strategies? Okay. So I would say then, for you and Carlos, if you feel that a mid-update is needed, then let us know, and then we'll try to schedule a time for it. Otherwise, we'll just stick with the monthly presentations that we have.
Well, I brought this up before, and I think that it should be worked in at least while the assembly's
Going.
in session, so that we can provide and have these mini discussions on things as they come up, because as of now, we've missed some opportunities to have a voice, even though we did meet with our legislators, but we could have really, there were things that have come up that we hadn't had a chance to discuss that weren't on our priority list that, again, were missed opportunities for when they went to vote.
It's good to note for when we.
For in the future.
For the future, yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Ms.
I'd
Campson?
I'd like a quick update on Lake Taylor School.
Okay.
We know they had a list of improvements to the building to get it ready last summer that they completed. What's on the list for this summer as they continue doing things to get ready for the following year as far as the physical plant goes, the little restrooms and all? And also, where are we with the discussion about the focus of the school? I know that Ms. Martin had brought up a very big interest in an environmental focus, working with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation and that type of thing. That was one idea that came up that was, particularly interesting. Has anything been done on that so far? Because I know that we talked last year about parental input. Just if we could just have an update on where we're going with that, because if whatever the focus is needs to be starting to be implemented next year, so that we don't get that school with the K-8 population and they're not ready to do any kind of focus.
And that, I think, ties in with what Tanya was asking for earlier with ADL. Maybe we look at how we take that and replicate that type of program at our district.
Ms. Basine?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
You remember that they're
Yes,
not-
yes,
Smith
go ahead,
first?
Christine.
Yep.
So along with what Ms. Campson
Especially
said about
programs
Lake
in the
Taylor Middle
years.
School, my concern with it includes the facilities, but also how is the school faring? What's the educational health of the school in that the combination that we created? How is that working from an educational planning perspective? We know the health that Fairlawn had when it was by itself. Now that we've combined it, what does it look like?
Are things progressing? All right, sounds great. Did you have one more item, Ms.
Yeah,
Basine? Okay.
well, not an item, so I appreciate you sharing that on March 4th, we're going to continue discussion on ed planning and start times. I would like to encourage us, we have a lot going on that front, including Lake Taylor School. There were a couple of items, and I had emailed about it that related to that school that we said this year would be like a planning year for that, like I think around the naming of the school and the uniforms.
Yes.
For instance, were a couple of things. But also, if you recall, the start time piece was also tied to the full K-8 implementation for Lake Taylor. So I think these are all connected. And along with the facilities master planning that's going on, I think it would be great if we could have like a monthly update or something where we're regularly getting updates on these initiatives that are going on to so that we know what progress is being made, and we can also be accountable for the work that's being done.
Okay,
One other.
all right. We have 4 minutes left, so 1 minute. Trying to keep us on schedule.
Booker T. I was afforded an opportunity to attend a PTA meeting that they had, and I'd like to hear more about us enhancing their STEAM or their arts program and how we can partner more with Norfolk State, and in particularly their engineering program and how it can benefit the students who are attending Booker T. Washington High School.
Right.
It's more of a comment, I guess. But it's kind of a comment and a question. So about our communications department, I'd like to know if there's been any movement to hiring a new director. And this comes from, not just because I want to know, but also I think it was last night, I don't know. But anyways, recently a parent was talking about all of the amazing specialty programs that we have in our middle schools and how they, and I hear this a lot, is that people don't know about them. And so they're in the process of selecting one, and we're just shocked at how many were available and just how wonderful they are. And so it brought me to, well, what's going on with our communications department? And, right now is when they're selecting, and We just are missing, it's a missed opportunity I know we're all aware of, but if there's anything we can do to help get that word out.
I
Okay.
would definitely continue to refer people to the website if they're interested in applying. We're still actively engaged in that process. And then when we are prepared to bring a recommendation to the board, we will do that.
Okay.
But we're still actively engaged.
Well, I really appreciate everyone's feedback. Again, what we're going to do is when we're in agenda planning, if this is a topic that was already on the mind of Dr. Birdsong and team, we can get that back out to you, again, so you can get some feedback on the suggestions. And if not, then we'll do a consensus of the board to see if that's something that we want to allocate time for. And if that's the consensus, we'll fit it in, and if it's not, we'll figure out maybe where in the parking lot we can come back to it. So, thanks everyone for your suggestions. I'd like to have a motion to enter into closed session.
Madam Chair, I move that we enter into closed executive session.
Second.
Okay. Like to hear the motion?
Resolution.
Into a closed session for the purposes which are set out in subsection A of Section 2.2-3711 of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, as amended, for discussion or consideration of prospective candidates for employment and assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific officers, appointees, or employees of the Norfolk Public Schools pursuant to subsection 1 of the above cited code section. The subjects of this portion of the session are discussion of the appointment of a specific person to a specific acting position and discussion of particular candidates, their circumstances, and possible contract provisions in connection with filling the vacancy of the office of superintendent. Consultation with legal counsel and briefing by staff members concerning actual or probable litigation or specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by counsel pursuant to subsections 7 and 8 of the above cited code section. The subjects of this section of the motion are consultation with legal counsel and briefing by staff members concerning the matters identified above. Basine?
Aye.
Campson?
Aye.
Clanton?
Aye.
Smith?
Aye.
Martin?
Aye.
Gabriel?
Aye. We'll enter in at 6:20.